into it. For the record, roll call.
Jess Beringer.
Mark Saunders.
Randy Mason.
Linda Kaufman. We have a quorum. I sent out the minutes from June 24th. I made a couple corrections that you guys gave me. Thank you very much. And I need a motion to accept.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks. Correspondence, I've received nothing at this point, so I think we're just going to go with our meeting plan. So, Ann, I'm going to go over there if that's okay. First off, thank you everybody that's here. We appreciate it. As I said, I'm Linda Kaufman. I chair the Parking Advisory Committee. We have a 6-person committee. Been working diligently over the last almost 2 years at this point, trying to come up with solutions. One of the things that we thought was important as we are into now sort of the next iteration of what we want to do or what we want to recommend, and it's important to remember that we are an advisory board, we're a recommendation kind of board, we are not decision makers. But we had put up quite a few permit recommendations last year, and because there wasn't any real input until the actual time the commissioners held it, we felt that if we were going to go forward with those same recommendations or make any changes, it was better to have input now and get as much input as we can to report back. So that's really the purpose of today's meeting. As I said, we're going to gain some input on the current permit system in the city, gather whatever input that people have, and make some, get some information for some possible recommendations for changes. So the format for today is I'm going to spend 20 minutes kind of talking about what we recommended and what was implemented and why we recommended it, and then open it up to the floor for any questions, conversation, input, pros, cons, things like that. So these are our 2018 recommendations. Keep in mind this was last year.
Excuse me, Linda, that one's not on.
Oh, Ann? That one's not on. Or
Is this going to explain also what's driving, like why was there a need for this committee and why?
good question. Thanks. And the other thing I'm going to say is because we're live, you're on camera, we're recorded, we're streaming. That when we get to questions, you're going to have to go to the mic and identify yourself. So, boy, I bet it's been 3 years ago. Some of the commissioners and the mayor had decided that it was time to get the parking looked at in a kind of thorough background. The parking had been sort of part of the transportation committee. The mayor felt at the time that it was important to sort of separate it at this point and look strictly at parking. They asked me to chair the committee. It's been in the paper, but I've got a little bit of a background in parking, like 35 years. So they asked that I chair it. So the reason behind it was look at everything that has to do with city and parking and make recommendations, and then let the city react to those recommendations. So it was pretty straightforward. It is, as I said, an advisory committee. So last year's recommendations was to extend the permit season to mirror the meter season. We felt it was really important that they were the same because it became very confusing to residents, to visitors, whatever. Is one ended on the third Thursday of something and the third Friday, and even as a full-time resident, I don't even know when they were. You had to look it up to see. So we recommended that they are the same. The other reason behind that, besides the confusion part of it, is that everything works in concert with each other. You can't just do something with permits. You can't just do something with meters. You can't just do something with regulations or enforcement or times or anything without each one being affected. And that was one of the things that we tried to impress upon the commissioners, is that the whole thing works in concert with each other. And so you have to look at the whole picture. And we felt that really the permit area is just an extension of the meters. You don't feed the meter, but you pay for the space, so it's an extension. So what the city did was they did extend the permit season 2 weeks to match the meter season, the current meter season. But it was not extended based on our recommendation of May 1st to September 30th. And we had made that recommendation for both meters and permits because we felt that the shoulder season really was expanding, and that the need for turnover, which is really what meters and permits and things do, is they create the turnover so that people can park in a space, be there for 2 or 3 hours, leave, someone else can come in, and you can create that turnover. And we were seeing more and more businesses say to us, boy, you know, it's getting tougher and tougher, particularly in the shoulder season. And the shoulder season is no longer Memorial Day to Labor Day. I mean, really, we're a vibrant town year-round, but from May 1st to September 30th, we're pretty active. I think everybody will agree that the moment the permits are off and the moment the meters are off, then it's pretty much all-day free parking, and a lot of times it's all-day free parking by employees. You know, that's not their fault. It's there and take advantage of it, but that hurts the businesses. And if you really think about it, if you've got an employee that's parking out front all day, that space isn't open for businesses. So we made that recommendation. It was extended only the 2 weeks, and this season was not extended. Extend the permit time to equal the meter hours. Again, this was one of the things that did meet with a lot of opposition when we made that recommendation, primarily from employees. But currently, the permits go off at 5. At the time we were making the recommendation, the meters went off at midnight. We recommended that they stop at 10, and the city did adopt the 10-hour or the 10 p.m. change for meters, but didn't extend the permits. The idea behind that was that, as I said before, permit area is really just an extension of the meters, and for the residents, and it's interesting because some of the residents have opposed this, and I mean, I'm a full-time resident. I live in an area that's impacted by permits, so, you know, we're not making recommendations that are impacting everybody else. We're making recommendations that also impact us. But on our street in particular, and I live on Laurel, and a lot of streets is somewhere about 1 to 2 o'clock, it gets overwhelmed with employees because it's a free space. And so by that time every day, there's absolutely no parking. Compound that with the fact that more and more houses, although they actually have to be built smaller than they were 10 years ago because of changes, they're all building to the maximum. And so, you know, they're building large houses with 5 and 6, in some cases 7 bedrooms, now mostly 5, and bringing 2, 3, 4, 5 cars. So you get the 2, 3, 4, 5 cars that weren't there 10 years ago, you get the employees, and you get the residents who now sometimes have 2, 3, 4, 5 cars, and at any point in time, there's only a finite amount of spaces on the street. So we recommended that the hours were the same. Now, how would that impact you or I as a resident, if you're a resident? Well, that means that the permits are now in effect until, if the recommendation's there, till 10 p.m. So now my friends, relatives, dinner guests have to have a permit. Well, we get the free permits that we can give them to put on their car. And frankly, if you live where we live, we don't have company in the summer because there isn't a space for them to park anyway, unless we put our cars out in the street and do, you know, all those jockeying. So the idea was sort of to keep people moving around, give options. It should also reduce some of the impact in the neighborhoods. But as I said, that was not adopted. Increased cost for additional permits for rental property and hotels to align with the cost of residents and visitors. This was an interesting one. Current permits are $250 for the season. If you had a rental house, you could get as many permits as you wanted for $30. If I lived in the house, I had to pay $250. We felt that there was a pretty large inequity there, that permits should be the same cost across the board. And although we didn't recommend everything being necessarily $250, what our recommendation was is it should all be equal. Hotels, who are required to have parking, by the way, but we're still allowed to buy them for $30, and rental properties should pay the same as you or I as a resident or the tourist coming into town. And that was actually implemented. So much to the chagrin of some of the realtors, and I appreciate that because although I don't think it was met with opposition, it was the timing of it that made it difficult, that it was put into effect pretty late in the season. So, we're trying to get this stuff out there before the season changes so that the changes can get advertised and get the information out, but it was implemented. Increase the cost of business licenses and include a free permit, increase to at least be equal to the cost of a permit. That's the other thing that a lot of people don't realize, but if you get a business license, you get a free permit. And it's important to remember that permit is a $250 value. And so, although we weren't always looking at financial impact, the more the city gives things away, the less revenue stream there is. And so, by giving a $110 permit, $110 license, but giving a permit with it for $250, there was a loss of revenue there. Some were changed, but my understanding is that they're still looking at a complete overhaul of the permit system, the licensing system, but it wasn't implemented based on our full recommendation. This is the one that met with a lot of opposition from residents. Limit the amount of free permits to residents to 2 permanent, 2 transferable, and 2 scooter. So the idea behind that, well, first let me address the scooter. We felt all along that it seemed odd that I could get as many permits for free for my car and as many permits for free, that I needed, but not for a scooter, which is a licensed motor vehicle in the state of Delaware. So that was changed, and so now residents do get 2 free scooter permits to go with it. And that scooter permit is actually a really viable thing because you can actually park anywhere downtown in those scooter zones with it. And we support the use of scooters because you can put 3 or 4 or 5 scooters in every 1-car parking space. The idea behind the 2, 2, and 2, which is how it became known, was that this goes back to what I said earlier. There's a finite amount of spaces on the street. Any way you cut it, there's only a certain amount of curb space. And so the ability to have that many permits out there really sort of takes away from the success of any permit program, because once you get 10 times more permits out there than you have street space, that permit really doesn't have a great value because you might buy a permit but you can't find a space. The other part of it was limiting it to 2 is we felt that might help some people think about using their driveways rather than the street, which frees up some street spaces. Because if now they had to buy a permit for $250 instead of getting a free one, perhaps that would be a little bit of incentive. The other part of it is it just seemed like a giveaway that the city was doing. I've said this before, if there's 10 people on the title or deed of that house, those 10 people get a free permit. They may not live anywhere near here. They're not necessarily residents, but they're on the deed, and they get free permits. And so they could live in Milton, they could live in Colorado, they could live wherever, but they get a free permit just by virtue of having their name on the title or deed. So we felt it was just a way to kind of pull that in a little bit and find a way for the city to have a little bit more revenue, but also sort of equal out the amount of permits that were out on the street. Scooter permits were implemented. None of the other changes were. Increase all permit fees. Again, good, bad, or indifferent, people need to realize that biggest source of revenue for the city is its parking things, and that's I call that in an industry, it's a user fee. People pay to park to come to Rehoboth, and that money then is used for clean streets and security and all nice beaches and all of those different things. Different beach communities do it different ways. Some do it with beach tags, some do it with toll roads, some do it with occupancy, lots of different ways. But the fees that come from meters and permits, the monies that go into the meter and the permit fees help the visitors have clean beaches and have safe and secure streets and clean sidewalks and all of those things. So whenever anybody talks about paying to park, they have to realize that those fees are used to help run the city, and it's a user fee. So we recommended that over time, like anything else, continue to increase the permit fees. Some were increased, others were not. Use technology to issue permits online and to enforce the permit areas. It's a work in progress. Currently we still have the people standing out there where people can pull up and buy the permits. There's a lot of technology out there that would allow people the convenience of being able to purchase them online so that they don't have to wait in line, get them ahead of time. Also, enforcing the permit areas. A lot of this is budget areas. It's also being implemented in pieces. And I think this year, the LPR, or license plate recognition, is being rolled out, and that's enforcement by license plate. You may or may not have seen it. Little car drives around, camera captures a license plate. It is the way to enforce these days. Very little, major cities have gotten away from walking the beat, chalking tires, doing all that kind of stuff. It's all through technology. And I have to give the city credit. They're investigating it, they're looking at it, they're making the changes. But there's some real budget issues. It's not an inexpensive way to go. So some of that, the technology is being looked at and slowly implemented, not slowly, implemented over time. Require contractors to have permits while in the city. That was one of the issues that I don't think people realize, but if there was a house being built and there were 10 subcontractors, they didn't have to buy permits. You or I did, and the visitors did, and everybody else did, but the contractors didn't. So we used, and all you had to do was put a sign that you were working on, wherever. I was going to use my address, but, it doesn't matter. Everybody knows where. But so as a joke, we used to tell our friends, just pull up on the street and put a sign on your thing and say you're working at the house down the street, and you wouldn't get a ticket. The city saw that inequity, and they've implemented that. And although some of the contractors didn't necessarily appreciate it, again, what we were looking for is equity across the board in a lot of different areas. So those were the recommendations we made. As you can see, a few were implemented. There were quite a few that weren't. So what our goal today is to get input so that we can continue. What we're looking at is all of the 2018 recommendations that we made on meters, on scooters, on adding more spaces, on permits, and we're going to present those recommendations to the commissioners again. So rather than jump into all of the old ones and simply say, yep, we want all those to go in, we wanted to start getting some input from people. In addition to that, I always like to say sessions like this are kind of designed to be the sky's the limit. Don't limit, if you have any thoughts, don't limit your thoughts to what we currently have. I mean, there are many, many changes that could be made with the permit, and I'm not recommending any of these. I'm simply saying from the parking industry. There are places that have streets that are for residents only, and non-residents have to abide by a time zone. That's a true residential parking permit program. It was started in Virginia, actually, in the 70s, where you could have streets that say you're only allowed there 2 hours. Everybody else, if you're a resident, you get a permit. Everybody else has to move. There's alternate side parking, where one side is residents only, the other side is visitors. There are some towns that are beginning to realize the impact of the many cars and the fact that there's just a limited amount of street parking, and actually limit it to saying 2 cars. As if you're visiting and you're renting a house, you're only allowed to bring 2 cars, period, and everything else has to be parked out of town. There are places that limit parking to residents only, not even with a time limit. So all I'm saying is there's lots of ways that this can be looked at in addition to just changing time or whatever. And we're not necessarily recommending any of those at this point. I'm simply trying to bring up some ideas of what could be done. So before I open it up to comments, questions, whatever, I want to ask if anybody on the committee has either anything to add, correct, because maybe I misspoke, or embellish.
I just have one thing that people may wonder, why do we need change at all? And I can tell you that there's been a trend since I moved here in 2005 for larger houses, particularly rental houses. And that the problem, of course, is there's also a trend of people, everyone wants to drive their own car. Carpooling is a sin anymore. You can't come with your spouse because you may have to talk to them or something, but everybody drives their own car. So the typical 5 or 6 bedroom house may come with 7 or 8 cars. That's 2 in the driveway, 2 in front, and 4 in front of somebody else's house. And if everybody did that, we'd have a real problem. So that's why over the last 15 to 20 years, as we've seen this trend towards bigger houses, we've seen a problem in the metered area, in the permanent areas. That's all I wanted to add.
I would say, and we've also discussed that we've witnessed a bit of a trend of people, even from Dewey, coming and parking for the entire week, or, you know, to go to their jobs, because it's easier to get a permit and find a space in Rehoboth. Recently, I live on the far reaches over by the cemetery, and recently we had somebody who we believe was an employee who was parking a car there and a scooter, and she would bring her car in to park in that spot, and then scooter, we believe, to Dewey, and then, you know, to do this switch. And then we had, you know, these cars that were not associated at all with the block. And I know in other neighborhoods there have been people who have been doing this for quite some time, parking over here. And, you know, the question is that appropriate, and is there some other method that we need to be looking at?
Yes.
I happen to live in a neighborhood where we see a lot, and I talk to people, and as they're parking, can I help you? Do you know where you're going? And I learned a lot that we get a lot of cars that stay for a week to 2 weeks and never move. And somehow you then get the resident feeling that we are nothing but a parking lot for the motels. There's also instances where people would get out in front of our home and have a paper map in their hand and then pull their luggage down the street. And I would naturally say, didn't you drop your luggage off at the motel where you're staying? And they said, no, they only give you one spot. And we came with 4 cars. And I said, and where did you get the map? At the desk of the motel, and our house was marked to park there. So I translated that into we're being a valet service for motels. That just doesn't settle when you're in a nice, trying to preserve a nice, quiet residential neighborhood.
Last Saturday, I forgot, there's 2 other things I want to mention, but last Saturday that happened, I was cutting the grass or whatever, and a van pulled up, and 2 cars pulled up, van parked, 2 cars pulled up, and 6 people got out of the van with at least 6 suitcases, probably more, and put them into the 2 cars. And I, of course, stopped what I'm doing and went over and I said, you know, are you aware that you can't park for more than 48 hours in front of that house? And they kind of looked at me, because that is a law, by the way. If somebody parks in front of your house for more than 48 hours, you can have it enforced. And they were like, no, and I said, well, where are you going? She said, Dewey. She said, and I said, how long? She said, for a week. And I said, oh, and she said, we've been doing this for 14 years. I said, okay, thanks. And went back to cutting my grass, and the car stayed there. So anyway. And then the last thing that I didn't mention, and it did come up at length, was employees. That one of the biggest opposition to extending the permit season, or the permit times past 5 o'clock, was the business community, who stood at the commissioners' meeting and argued that that would heavily impact the employees. And there's no doubt about it that if they're allowed to park for free and now have to buy a permit, it would impact them. I think the question that we're trying to get to is the city's responsibility to provide free parking for employees. You know, shuttle systems are being looked at. I've said it before that employees will not, you know, this is parking 101, but employees or anybody won't take the park and ride in if it's not convenient and if it's not the least, the cheapest or the least hassle-free. And right now, as long as you have free parking on the street, there's no incentive for someone to park out at Park and Ride and come in. Some do, and it does get used, but it's not heavily utilized. So if we think that, you know, putting a Park and Ride in is going to solve the employee problem, I would professionally disagree with that. So the employee piece of this is a big piece if they get extended. And that has to be tackled in how do you solve that problem? Because again, someone said, well, you're just going to impact or whatever, and they're here anyway. It's just a matter of whether they would then buy a permit or not. So, you know, having said that, if nobody else, I'm going to sit back down. So, Ann, you don't have to stay, and then I'll kind of moderate from there so that we have the cameras in the right place, because, you know, that's all important. Yeah, thanks. You can shut this down and do it. And then we're just going to open it up to questions, comments, input on anything. I'd prefer at this point that we at least talk about permits in the beginning, but, you know, there's a lot on the table, and we're willing to take information about anything. So there you have it. Now's the time. Come on up and
Made a few notes, I hope I can remember.
you have to give your name, address.
Bob West, 312 Stokely Street. And I'm gonna hold it.
I'm sorry, Bob West? What-
Yes, 312 Stokely. It seems like it's pronounced Stockley, but Stokely is the local pronunciation. Okay, extending the season, I am in favor of that. That means the times the permits would go till 10, and I believe that you're saying it matches the metering time, and that seems all logical, and I think making regulations easy to understand, it's more likely people are gonna follow them, so that's, I'm cool with that. Increase the permit cost for hotels and rentals, I'm in favor of that. Increase business licenses, what do I put here? Okay, I didn't even know that the business licenses, some of them include permits. Maybe that could be decoupled, maybe, you know, because you mentioned there was a disparity in the fees, but maybe just no free permits. I don't understand why, you know, that doesn't make sense. You're saying you're paying 110 for a permit or something and getting a $250, business permit and get the parking with that. So I would suggest don't mess with the fees because I think you're crossing two different areas of, you know, of governance there, and just decouple it, and then you have less things to argue about. Okay, off topic slightly is bike racks. You know, bike racks are overflowing in the city, you know, so we actually could use more bike racks in more locations. And the number of permits per house, that kind of would be a little slightly problem with me. I prefer, I think, not going extreme, and maybe, like, I don't know what this, I wish I had some statistics on how many houses are getting 10 of them and that kind of thing. I'm thinking here, I'm just guessing, if you're in Pennsylvania and they have 10 of them, I don't think they're all going to be here at the same time anyways. And that's the main reason why I came to the meeting, is a little concerned about that. But maybe be better for everybody to give a few more of the temporary ones and only 2 permanent. And I know in my household, because you got people coming on the weekend, and that adds more flexibility and probably not actually going to take up more parking total. And I didn't know the parking was the main revenue resource. I didn't know about the contractors need permits. So overall, though, I'm really pleasantly surprised that everything here made more sense. And I thought, I came to the meeting thinking, like, what are they up to here? We're gonna, like, this town is getting corrupt or something. But no, I'm really happy that you came, because of the misinformation, and the neighbors like, what's, yeah. So I'll relay this stuff in the Country Club Estates Homeowners Association. Let's see, the meters, the turnover goal, I agree with that. I know me, in the off season, when that parking is free, I'm gonna park next to the restaurants there. And you can see immediately the whole avenue is filled up with parking. It just happens immediately. So extending the season, definitely, and because you can just park a block away off the avenue, and you know, and I feel for some sympathy there for the businesses where, you know, you need to, I've talked to Trey at Carlton's where, you know, the people need to conveniently park, and if they can't see your store, you know, they're not going to come. And I know he's a big concern is turnover. Like, I think we've limited some of the meter areas to 3 hours, and you didn't mention that, but maybe there's more areas where the maximum time of the meters, has that been looked at?
Yeah, so 2 points of reference. Trey's on the committee, he just couldn't be here today.
Okay.
So we get a lot of input from him. Second thing is, we thought we would do this with permits today, and if it was successful, we might extend it to meters. So today was really about permits, but
Yeah.
to your point, yes, meters were increased on the avenue to make them to be the highest cost, because
Yeah.
you know, the prime spot should always be the highest, and the time limit of 3 hours is gradually being enforced so that so people understand that they can't be there all day.
Yeah. Okay, well, that sounds like a good trend. And the other thing that's not mentioned, I've just noticed around town, some people have maybe gone out and bought their own yellow paint, but some things are a little bit crazy about people trying to save spots in front of their house, maybe to combat these problems, and they're taking it into their own hands. But some of these yellow line things have gotten pretty, you know, weird. I don't even see a driveway, or can't even imagine, unless they're saying they're parking on their front lawn all the time. So, you know, I think that's just some pushback in trying to people how to handle that. And anyways, but okay, thank you. Yeah, and I didn't know about the 48. So I got a lot of good information here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. And the other point of reference, just so you know, we meet once a month. We advertise it. It's a public meeting, and anybody that's been to our meetings know that it's a pretty open, you can put input on anything. So feel free, because we try not to be corrupt. We meet in the open as much as possible. But thank you very much. Good, all good comments. We appreciate that.
Just to address one more issue, which isn't really part of us, is the bike racks. That's not, unfortunately, not this committee. It is Streets and Transportation, but that has been passed on to them, and that is something that they are absolutely looking at.
And there are a lot of bike racks.
So
But I'm not necessarily thinking, yeah, more bike racks. I don't know. It seems like there's got to be enough.
Well, they are taking that up and looking at that closely.
Thank you.
One of my pet things is more biking, having a bigger footprint in bike racks too. And I can notice and honestly say that there's been a tremendous increase in the use of scooters and bikes this year. And that we take as a positive. So yes, we have to help acknowledge that and provide more spaces.
Yeah, and I have a...
I'm sorry, but
Okay.
yeah, it's because it's
I'm back.
recorded.
This is Bob again. Yeah, also I have an inexpensive e-bike, and mostly I run it just by pedaling and not using the electric motor. But I can see like a huge boom in bikes with that, because like on a hot day, you don't even have to sweat. But then, you know, you can get your exercise when you want to. And I think that's going to enable a lot of people who might feel like they're not in good shape or whatever, or being afraid of getting too tired. So I think there's going to be a boom in that, in biking, you know, with that trend.
Thanks. Anybody else? You can bring that up. You don't have to bend over.
John Welch, 315 Stokely. In terms of permits, currently, I would like to see maybe a situation where 2 permits per house and the scooters like you had suggested before. And then the additional, if you have like 10 owners or something like that, maybe 5 of the transferable permits rather than all those permanent permits, you know what I mean? So that when people do come to visit, because not all 10 people are going to have all 10 cars at the same time, probably. I mean, that would seem unusual, but anyway, it's a thought. And secondly, if you do it 2 cars and then for the scooters, if someone doesn't have any scooters, maybe 3 cars but no scooters is another alternative. That's it.
Do we have statistics available from the parking office as to how many households get more than 2 permanent permits? Is that something that would be available?
I think we can get that.
Yeah, we could ask. That would be City Hall administrative staff for the parking department, so we could ask.
Okay, because you know, we don't really know how much of an issue that is. I don't think there are many people with 10 owners. But
It would be interesting.
it would be interesting to know.
Yeah.
See,
So can you get that information for us?
I can look into it, yeah.
And then just either have Sharon or someone send it, but that would be great. Because I thought we had that at one point.
Well, we have this, which it doesn't really break down.
It doesn't break it down, though. I'm curious, to your point, of how many have multiple, so that would be an important thing. So
but
we'll
we
get
we
that.
do know certainly that there are people with 3 and 4. I mean, and it may just be, you know, the 2 owners, but they have you know, an additional Jeep for going out on the beach, and you know, a fun car and that sort of thing. So if we can get that, that may be helpful, so we can determine, you know, how to work with this.
And I use the 8 to 10 as sort of just an example, which I wasn't necessarily saying that that was the norm, just trying to explain that it could be 3, it could be 10. I mean, there's no limit to it, is my point. Okay, thanks. Next, Susan?
Susan Gang, 316 Country Club. You know, I'm really concerned about this whole situation with the hotels. And I had heard that more than, you know, the people occupying one room were often bringing more than one car. And hearing, you know, this direct evidence of it is a concern, because I don't know what to do about it, but I feel like it's going to get worse because we've got 2 or 3 new hotels planned. And if that's the trend, then, and one of them is very near Country Club, you know, on State Road. And if they come with, you know, in those 90 rooms and have more than one car, then Country Club area, which is already a little bit problematic in that area anyway, because it abuts the commercial district, is just going to get worse. So I don't know what the solution is to that. I mean, it's somewhat akin to the problem of people going to Dewey and parking in the residential neighborhoods, but I feel like that's just going to get worse and really needs to be addressed.
You know, it's interesting because currently the code requires one per room.
Right.
One space per room. No different really than houses that require only two spaces.
Right.
And if you remember, there was quite the debate on that years ago about the need for more spaces. It to me is sort of a comprehensive look at, you know, do we start thinking about code changes that, you know, hotels need two per room, or and obviously there's pushback on anything like that. Do homes need three if they're over 4 bedrooms? I mean, ultimately, I've said it before, there's only a finite amount of spaces at the curb. And anybody that's been here, you know, I don't know how long most residents, we've been here 13 years full-time, and the change from 13 years ago to now is dramatic as far as the street impact. And I don't see it getting better. I see it going the opposite way.
And Susan, another thing that could regulate that would be the price of them. If they
Well-
were $1,000 a permit, we wouldn't sell as many, you know? So we should just raise the price for non-residents,
Right,
you know,
yeah, that's
drastically to cut down the number of permits.
And hearing you say that just it's making me think too that we ought to have all of that data in the new CDP. You know, if we can find out the data of how many are being sold and all that, we need to have all that data. And then the next step would be to look at the code beyond when the CDP comes out and see what changes need to be made based on all that real world
There are
information.
questions on the CPP about this, aren't there?
I don't know if there's specific ones about the permits.
There was something I remember.
I mean,
Well,
there's
parking
parking's
there,
in there.
yeah.
Parking's in there a lot, but I'm just saying this is a situation where we presumably have and can get real data in there. And once we get the real data in there, then that will suggest the code changes to come after that.
Thank you.
Susan, one idea that I've thought about that would help the situation of bringing too many cars. My wife and I have rented at other resorts, and every single time, from the day we sign a contract, we are told by the rental agent to not bring more than 2 cars. 1 week before we go, we get a call, and they say, do not bring more than 2 cars. You only have 2 spaces. We drive into that town and feel secure that there is parking, and it works. So that I foresee the way to solve that here would be to build a stronger relationship between the real estate industry and the renters, and that they help us get the word out that there is not unlimited parking.
Yeah, education is key.
Yes.
Just 2 items. I agree with you. I've been to a number of different resorts, and they do limit the parking to 2 cars. And believe me, if you bring more than 2 cars, you got a real problem. Secondly, you mentioned that Dewey has stricter parking regulations than we do, therefore people are parking here. Maybe we need to look at what their parking regulations are to find out why people from Dewey are parking here and then taking a scooter over.
We did
Ours should be,
last year.
yeah, ours should be at least as difficult to get as theirs are.
I think in some cases Dewey's is just a lack of space.
Yeah, I think
Well,
that's
but
more
we're
than
getting to that point too.
Right.
We're now getting to where we're having a lack of spaces.
When we
You
first
can see
started,
it.
there was a disparity in the price, and we recommended that that be changed.
Right.
So it's not that anymore.
Right, but maybe there's something like that we need to
Right.
look at to make it
Right.
less desirable
Right.
to park here
Well,
and
they
take your
have very
scooter
lax
over.
zoning, or almost no zoning.
Right.
So they don't have the regulations we have. but-
Exactly. Thank you.
Next. Oh, don't be shy.
I have an off-season, non-permit.
Up to the thing, if you don't mind.
This might not be the form.
No, it's okay. Hey, we'll tell you if it's not.
My name is Bing Crosby. I'm a vendor to the city. I'm with the Rehoboth Beach Jazz Festival. And for a couple decades now, we've been renting the convention center. And one of our biggest issues has been parking. To our clients that come in, we bring in a couple times a day, 800 and almost 900 people per show. And up to this point, basically telling them there's some parking on the streets, there's some parking in the neighborhood. You can always take the bus in if it's available at the time, et cetera, et cetera. So we thought about it at our last board meeting and came up with a suggestion for the parking lot here, if you were a vendor. And two key things are, if you're a vendor and it's off-season, it must be off-season. And it's a sort of a two-parter. One is when a vendor rents the convention center, they should be given the opportunity to rent the parking lot if they intend to make money off the parking lot. In other words, they will sell tickets to the parking of whatever it is, they manage the parking area. The second part to that, which is what the Jazz Festival is more in favor of, is that we would get control of the parking area. We would monitor it, do safety. We would make sure we have parking attendants. And we would literally sell tickets to this on our website. And I'm just going to make up some numbers here. $5 a parking space per show. Not all day, per show. We would take that money and 100% give it back to the city in some form. We'd give it to the fire company, we'd give it to whoever's designated. We would not keep the money. But it would allow us to do two things. It would allow us to give a venue for our customers to park, and it would also give us the ability to give money back to the city, because the city has been good to us over the last couple of decades. And we experienced one last item. We experienced this really more last year when we started using the new facility. And we saw that there's such an excellent opportunity here for all of us to benefit from this. And that's where I'm coming from. I just wanted to make a suggestion.
I'm just missing, they can use it now. Why can't they go in and put money in the meter now?
Well, the problem is that if we have 800 some people coming in and we have the public also using the parking
But you
area.
want to take the public out.
Yeah, see, for the show, well, I'm sorry, maybe I did
Off-season,
not.
and you said off-season.
Off-season, only off-season, because that would be suicide during season. But only off-season during our show times.
Now I understand, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So you're saying have the lot dedicated, and we'll pass things like this. This is beyond this committee, but you know, we pass these kind of recommendations on the city. But if I'm understanding, is have the lot designated for the vendor that rented the convention center.
Right.
That nobody else can park there, you control it, you charge for it, and then you theoretically turn the money back
Well,
over to somebody.
it's two parts. If the vendor chooses not to turn money back into the city, I would suggest the city charge them for the lot.
Okay,
If they choose to give back to the city, like we would, don't charge for the lot, because the city's going to get the money anyhow. But it would allow our customers a first chance opportunity to park in front of the convention center.
The trouble is, of course, you're giving your people preference over all the people that are eating in the restaurants and all that. That's not quite fair either.
That is an issue, and I will not doubt that.
But at the moment, since we're talking off-season, they're not paying for parking in any of the locations. Is that
Correct.
right? Okay, so you're just giving them priority for the location.
Correct.
VIP parking.
VIP parking.
Which we've all paid for.
And,
Right,
and then
exactly,
money
we
would
do.
be returned to the city. So, thank you.
Interesting idea.
Thanks.
And I will say that one of the things that we are going to be looking at is the possibility of extending some sort of meters possibly, or the permits into the shoulder season, because there are so many activities that go on that create parking issues. And that the way to control some of these issues is by controlling meters and
That's true.
permits. So taking this into account at the same time, I mean, it's good to hear, you know, as we discuss that.
Mr.
going
Crosby, you
forward.
may want to watch that there is a committee now looking into building a garage there.
I'm
Which may
aware
or
of
may
that.
not happen, and that, of course, would fall right into what you're talking about.
We would, personally, we would love to see that, because that's much more parking available. But, and we're mid-October, as you know, and just slightly out of the shoulder season that's been suggested. But anyhow, I wanted to bring it up
Thank
and
you.
suggest it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Bob West again, 312 Stockley. The parking garage, will there be another committee on that? Because that's kind of a hot topic that a lot of residents feel like that benefits businesses, and, you know, we can't afford the sewer system, and why would we get involved in a parking garage?
Two things that, there is a task force that's already formed, we've already met 2, maybe 3 times. I'm on it, Mark's on it as a resident, I'm on it as a parking advisory. Where it's at right now is a discussion of putting out an RFP to see if it's even feasible and if somebody's willing to do it. It started because an independent, a business vendor, a company that builds garages and runs them, came to the city and offered a pretty sweet deal, which was they would build it, they would pay for it, they would maintain it in return for the city allowing it to happen.
Okay.
So whether that's feasible, whether it's really gonna happen, whether it's something that can happen, the task force was formed with a cross-section of the, I will miss people, but planning, the chamber, commissioners, Main Street, some residents, the parking committee, some businesses, whatever, to look at it. The RFP that's being prepared at this point isn't a definitive it's gonna be built. Is there even interest in some of these companies to do it?
Okay, thank you. And that makes more sense than our worst fears. Because it's exactly what I thought that they should do is like, if it's profitable, then, then let somebody else do it, not taxpayers. We don't want a more tax burden on that. So,
That for whatever reason, and those meetings are also public, but that information seems to just not get out there, that the concept is all along that the city wouldn't be putting out hard cash. There'd be some land and, things like that, because of course that's city-owned land and things, but the theory all along has been no cash outlay.
right. And I like Bing Crosby's, if that's his real name, his idea, yeah, for those that makes those music events and the jazz festival, and I'm in favor in making that work better for everybody, and that's a good thing for the town. And let's see, what was one other thing? I forget now. Okay, well, I think I've said enough. Thank you.
Thanks, no, we appreciate it. Next, Carol, I know you had some stuff, can I?
Carol Everhart, Rehoboth Beach, Dewey Beach Chamber of Commerce. I'll put on my visitor hat, okay? I'm not getting any negative, number one, on the increase of rates. I've had lots of complaints on things, but rates, nothing, not one. So that's been a surprise to me that we haven't gotten that, because there was a belief that there might be some uproar over that from the visitors. There is not. There's 2 complaints, main complaints, which is going to go opposite of the residents. The time being limited to 3 hours, that is almost the number 1 complaint. I mean, it's really tied with, they feel the way it is complicated for them. So, we have visitors out there that are struggling with Park Mobile. So when they see different time frames, different locations, all of that, they're confused. But those are really the only 3 things. We've already given you in writing, where the board and the chamber had on all of these.
Do you think, because I know the city's working on a good sign program in conjunction, and so, again, for the public, the idea behind the time limit on Rehoboth Avenue and some of the key areas was to get people to move to the outskirts so that they weren't parking all day and going to the beach. But without a good sign program, which hasn't been implemented yet, it's in the works, people don't realize it. So they get there, find the space. I just saw it this morning because I was walking around before the meeting, and a woman was unloading her, she was 4 spaces from the bandstand, unloading her trailer full of stuff and, putting it all in, and I saw her walk up to the meter and have a sort of a look of dismay. So do you think the sign program will help so that people know as they're pulling in, like, don't park here all day because these aren't all day meters?
Well,
They'll also be directed on where they can park all day.
if it's simplified and identified, that's key. And the education is key. It was also implemented quickly, okay, for good reason, but it was implemented quickly. And so they've not had enough education in it. But if it's simplified, it's identified, and I just can't tell you how many people, if we get 10 complaints, that represents 100 people. Okay, so we've had more than 10 complaints. And they're just not going to stop and write it down for me. We have a system, a policy. They're not going to give me your name. If I can't use it, the complaint doesn't count. Okay, we're not going to follow through. If you're willing to do that, we make sure the city officials know and that we act upon that. And for both them and whoever they're complaining about, it could be a business. It's our job to let you know that. They just don't believe, and it's your day visitor. So your visitor comes in, they're unpacking their stuff, right? And it's only 3 hours. It's not enough for them. Or they come in for dinner. That's the other complaint I get, or lunchtime type of thing. It's 3 hours at the beach. If you're there for the day, it's
But, so,
once it's identified, perhaps that'll help.
identifying, because the rationale behind it, which I think we all agree was important, was we didn't want people going to the beach and parking all day on Rehoboth Avenue, because that's the main street, and you want it to be open so that they can find a place to go to the restaurant. Maybe 3 hours, is enough, but so that they can find those. If that woman with her trailer load of stuff stays in that space all day, then that space isn't open for other people. So,
Can I ask you a question? I understand the visitors are complaining, but do the restaurant owners like it better? What do the businesses say? Because they're really our customers.
Well, this is always a split. I've found this, I've been here decades, and I've always found in downtown in particular, it's usually a split with something. There's those who want the movement of the vehicles, and there's those who don't want the movement of the vehicles. It's been that way for a long time. So I don't know that I can say overall, but I can say that it continues to be an issue. I applaud. It's a lot of work to do this. You guys give your time. You're not getting a big paycheck for this, and
not popular at cocktail parties either.
And it's complicated. Yeah, it's a very complicated problem. I was asked by the commissioners to go out and see what I could find on different spaces. We thought perhaps there could be use of the school. Okay, I won't know that till the construction is completed, so we just put that aside. We had spaces back here. Could they be used for long-term parking only? I don't know. It was an idea that was brought up. And then I looked at the Bay. Bayport. And of course, that's in flux right now. So those were the only 3 options that we could really see. I do agree they're not using the park and ride as much as it could be used. I do think the new facility out at Lewis is helping. It was pretty full. It's pretty full.
Parking, the whole management, as I said before, and we said it to the commissioners, is it's holistic. Everything affects each thing. And so the idea is that you can't just make one change and expect it to solve the things. I know our committee was disappointed that, maybe, I don't remember the numbers, but a small amount of the changes were implemented and a lot of them weren't. Now, I know it's still a work in progress, and I've heard from a lot of commissioners that they're still going to do it. That's why we're still meeting, and that's why we're still going through this, because we're trying to refine our recommendations and go back to the commission and say, you know what, of the 18 that you didn't implement, we still stand by 14 of them. 4 of them we've adapted, we've amended, we don't agree with, and those numbers aren't concrete, I'm just using it as an example. But we're still here looking at those things, because until you put the program into place that works, until you have a good alternate place for those long-term parkers with good signage and convenience and all of the things and things that give people incentive to take the park and ride, it doesn't work until you put it all together.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, and I think the nucleus is, where is this long-term parking going to be? Where is that going to be? Because that would solve both for the resident, both for the business, and if we can just simplify that, I don't know the answer, but I know that's what we need to do. And really identify that long-term. I know they're working on new signage, and that will definitely help, but they need to know when they drive in, honestly, You're welcome to work a day in the visitor center and try to explain the parking to the person who comes in. And if they don't come in, now that I sit at 306, I watch them. They come in, they go around, they think that's it.
Yeah.
Eventually, they kind of pull into my driveway there at 306 and they come in, or they go down to the visitor center. And it's just too, for us, it seems so simple, but for the person who's never been here, or things used to be a certain way and now they've changed, it's been an interesting summer.
I don't want to put words, so I just want to clarify. When you said long-term parking, I'm assuming you mean for both day and nighttime long-term. I mean, long-term, whether it's daytime for people going to the beach or nighttime because they're employees or whatever, just long-term.
Long-term parking. If I come in for whatever reason, I come in because I want to spend the day at the beach, or I come in because I'm just having dinner, but I don't want to be limited, and they don't want to walk. We've talked about this.
There's that.
Yeah, there's that. So something that is the long term is what I think is the nucleus of the issue.
Okay.
Can I ask, what do you think the chamber's reaction will be if we change the times of the permits in the residential areas? Do you think there'd be any reaction? Do you think they like it, don't like it? We went from 5 o'clock as it currently is to 7 or 9?
Well, whatever you do that impacts employees, okay, they're having a terrible time. All of the positive in the world of economics and business has caused a real shortage in employees. There's more jobs than employees. So they're fighting with that. And if you owned a business downtown, okay, and I own a business out on Route 1 or someplace else, and we're both looking for employees. For me to get you to come out to Route 1 or someplace else, pretty easy. For me to get you to come downtown, I'm telling you, you have to find a parking place, or you have to take a transit. And so that's just an additional challenge to overcome for them.
And I'm not going to put you on the spot because I don't want to, but that's sort of the main question is, that's an issue, but whose responsibility is that?
Well,
Is it the business? Is it the city? Is it the employee? And so that's the challenge, and what the commissioners heard at the last time when we presented this was, this is a problem the city has to solve. That's what I heard from the business. A lot of the businesses that stood up said just what you said, and you can't change this because you don't have a solution. And so I translate that to the city has to solve the problem. And I don't know where I fall on this, but that's one of the things that we've wrestled with is
I think it takes
the
all of
facts are
us.
there.
Yeah, I think it's a community issue. The residents are having issue with it. I can hear this. I see it clearly. Businesses are having issue. Visitors are having issues. So it's a community problem.
And this is one of the reasons that I think now is a time that people are talking about the possibility of the garage again, because it creates a lot more spaces that if you had longer term parking available in the garage, it's centrally located and doesn't negatively impact being in front of a store all day or in front of a resident for a week necessarily. I don't know how that'll all shake out.
Well,
but
that was
hopefully
something the chamber,
that will
yes,
help.
we strongly supported that. If it is feasible and doable, we strongly support that garage. And perhaps that's your long-term parking. I think it needs to be a designated central space for it to work.
And if for some reason that doesn't happen, there are other ways to achieve that. And that's the other thing that we're looking at. And by doing that is, we have the shuttle capabilities at this point. As you've said, you've got the Lewis Center, you've got the park and ride. There are other places, but you have to get people who are willing to take that shuttle. And they're not an employee who will drive around and find the free spot is going to do that, I believe very strongly, before they take that shuttle in and have to take it out at 2 o'clock in the morning. So there's the issues that if you want the shuttle to work, you have to put other pieces in place. And that could be not free permits, or you have to have it more convenient, or you have to have it more regular, or you have to have it more central, or whatever it is. But that's the give and take.
I agree.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Carol. Absolutely. This is all about input.
Yeah, for part of that discussion, and you mentioned the holistic, so I know that you understand it, but the idea of people parking all day on the avenue, that's certainly the behavior that nobody wants, and the only way to stop that is the price or the time limit. But the option, and maybe why they're confused, they sell the permits, those stands around town. Maybe they don't understand, and I don't know what is the cost if you paid the meter all day. I don't even know what it cost, and I don't even know what the daytime passes cost. But obviously, you have to make sure that cost drives behavior. Is that they're going to get the stay off the avenue and get a daytime pass rather than feed the meter on the avenue. And also, it'd be nice. Not asking anybody to do any work for me, but a chart, like we can't read people's minds, what are the types of parking users? Because yeah, I think to clarify these, categorize who, the employees we're talking about, all these different things, I think it would be a lot clearer if we sort of, knew what and where they would park and then how much you pay. To me, I'd like to see like a matrix chart of that kind of thing. And also, even with this parking garage, they would have to pay for that. And really, I mean, I feel for the employees because I know those restaurant employees aren't making much money. But I don't think it's the city's and the residents' job to subsidize that either. Thank you.
Um, I forgot to add one thing, and this is, just a process, but one of the other questions, I tend to ask people who are parking on the street a lot of questions or whatever, and the one person was pulling up and pulling, all their stuff out, and I asked something, and she said, well, when I bought the permit, the guy told me, just go into the neighborhoods and, find a place to park. Now, I understand what he's saying is that's where the permit areas are, but the perception is just go into the neighborhoods, and so that's the impact. But to your point, whether it's that long-term visitor or the long-term employee, the challenge is how do you solve that and whose responsibility, and, I hear you.
I have a question that maybe someone in the audience could answer. When you look at a system, you know what a limit is, whether it's a sewer system and has a certain capacity, a parking lot has so many spaces. We're charged not with raising revenues, but with improving parking. And I've often wondered, what is the mass that we are talking about? If you ask what the population is, people say 1,400 year round. Well, Eastern Sussex County is probably now our biggest customer with, yesterday's paper showed another 550 houses that are going to be built, and they flood in here. A town like ours, what is the critical mass where things start breaking down? And we hear that on a busy weekend in the summer, there's 150,000 people. I don't know if that's true, but how does the police force, all the other infrastructure things handle 150,000 people? Where are we going 5 years from now? At some point, you hear all around the world and reading that tourism kills neighborhoods, and it's happening. So is there a figure of where the police department is concerned at how many numbers are in town? The streets, Rehoboth Avenue, are gridlock on a weekend. Where is it going? Anybody have an idea? Where we just will have 10,000 more next year and 10 more the next.
There isn't a development that is going up that doesn't advertise 2 miles to the beach, close to the beach, walk to the beach, bike to the beach. And I know Lewis is having the same issues, is that at some point, all of those houses, and you were nice when you said 500 something, because if you kept reading through the article, I was gonna say, there's 11,000 houses.
In the works, I think.
In the works, literally 11,000 in the works. So all of those people want to go to the beach,
Yeah.
and all of those people want to come into town, and you'll have the business that says that's great, the mass it's good, but at some point, to your point, the infrastructure can only handle so many, and that's, I think, the bigger issue that the city's going to have to, and I say the city, proper, has to figure out how to manage, and it's difficult when you start saying, you don't want people, but, you take a look at London and a couple other cities who have put the ring around it and said, if you want to come in, you pay.
Yeah.
And, I've joked about this before, but there's 3 main ways to come into town, and you can put up 3 toll booths and solve your,
We're full.
Or a sign says we're full, come back.
yeah, come back later, and,
Well, I think Susan wants to talk about that, right? Because this is what the CPC is all about, isn't it?
It's about bringing all of these issues to the
Right.
fore, that's for sure, you can't resolve them until.
So the advertisement is, if you haven't filled out it online, you should do that. If we're at,
The comprehensive development plan.
Susan, you want to just explain what it
Maybe
is,
just-
if you don't mind?
in case anybody here doesn't know.
The comprehensive development plan is the state mandated document that defines our land use and our priorities for development in the city and the goals for the city over a 10-year period. So the last one was done in 2010, and the 2020 is being worked on now. And the Planning Commission's been working on it for a year or two in paving the way and in preparation for now. What's starting now is the most important part of it, which is the public participation process, because it should reflect the public's vision, not my vision, not our vision on the commission, but the community's vision. And it's also going to be heavily data oriented this time, because our consultant, we have all that data now. And so we have a consultant who's bringing all that in. And it really should be both, it should be our visions as well as the data that support them and the data that bring up all these questions. So, and then the next step after it's due to be completed in the summer of 2020. And then the next step beyond that is for implementation and changing the codes to go along with what's come up in the plan. And the implementation is actually done by the commissioners, not by the Planning Commission.
You're committed to the survey.
The survey is, there's a link to it on the city website, right on the homepage. There's an icon for it about halfway down the homepage. And it's a long survey. The community survey is the one you want to do. Property owners should be doing the community survey. And I will forewarn you, it's long. It takes about probably 20 to 30 minutes to complete. It's on SurveyMonkey through our consultant, and you don't have the option to do part of it and go back out and go back in, unfortunately. But if you only do part of it, or you skip some questions, whatever you complete and hit the button on the bottom of the page is registered. So you could do part of it if you want, or you can skip questions if you want, but if they don't apply to you or whatever. But it does. It's 40-something questions. And I think the reason for that is we have so many complex issues that it was hard to make it any shorter.
And they can find that where? What's the easiest
On the
place to
city
find it?
website, in the middle of the city website is a little icon for Comprehensive Plan 2020.
RehobothBeach.com, and that would
The City of Rehoboth.
City of Rehoboth.
City.com. Oh, until the end of August 31st.
I think the Rehoboth Beach Homeowners Association has it on that website also.
I don't have the icon on the site. I haven't gotten that yet, but it is on. I think there's a link to the survey.
Yeah, I think there's a link.
The link to the survey on the site.
So- I think what is important that you're hearing is that, we're a small piece of this, so we're looking at parking. But there's transportation, there's land use, there's, the county, there's all of these other issues that the city has to look at. So, as I said, not one issue in parking is gonna solve all the parking issues. The parking isn't gonna solve the bigger issues. So you have to remember that each one of these builds on each. And to your point is, when is our community so overwhelmed that we can't handle it anymore? And, there really are only 2 main places that people go. I think Dewey would be the third probably, but, people go into Lewis and they come into Rehoboth from all of those 11,000 plus houses being built, so.
And there was criticism last year when we wanted to raise the 5 o'clock. Well, you should see the flood of eastern Sussex County coming in at 5, parking their cars and with a smile saying, we don't have to pay to go to dinner or to the bars. Well, I said it wasn't all about revenues, but we've all gotten tremendous increases in the last month in water, sewer, refuse, property tax, because we are doing the infrastructure. There's a whole group of people that aren't contributing anything, but they use the town. That's out of balance, in my opinion.
Is there anybody here from the realtors? Because we invited them, unfortunately. I know this is, Mondays are never a good time, and summer is a difficult time.
I'm not from the realtors, but I am from the hoteliers, if that's helpful.
If you would,
I can give you a different point of view.
you need to come up to the microphone, if you don't mind, and give your name. That'd be great.
Hello, my name is Karen Zakarian, and I work at a facility at 2 Olive Avenue with over 100 employees. Okay, I've lived and worked in Rehoboth for 35 years.
So
Okay?
you work at a
So
hotel?
I do.
Okay.
Okay, and so the issues that we've had to address are, we've lost staff, specifically because of the cost of coming to park to a job that is not a high-wage job. There isn't a hotelier or a restaurant who couldn't tell you a different story, or a retail operator in downtown Rehoboth. And so the suggestion is to please figure out a way to support your businesses if you want to continue to be prosperous, because just like it was your windfall, it can be your downfall. Okay, there was something recently printed, and I'll share it with you at a later time. But so that's our first issue. Our second issue is affordability for parking. I understand that you have to charge for parking, and I understand that we bring in a large clientele that has to pay for parking, you know, taxes, parking, all of that. That's not the issue. The issue is staffing. And so it puts a great strain on our businesses. I know that back in February, at least, you addressed perhaps off-site parking. It still needs to be addressed. It's sorely missed. It's not available. We've had issues with the Park Mobile app for a person who has booked groups for many, many years, and a person who deals with transients and employees. We have all told everyone who comes into town to download the app at home, whether you're in Rhode Island, as an example this weekend, or you're here. We've had trouble downloading the app. We have been able to look out of our facility, sitting in an office, looking out at people trying to pay the meters and try and help them, and it's been difficult. Okay, so those are some of the downfalls. It's not that you shouldn't, you know, no one's saying you don't have to pay for parking. It's just it needs to be affordable, reasonable, and you know, attainable by those that need it, not just those coming in. It's not the visitors that are complaining.
When you say attainable, you mean the ability to find a space?
No, I mean affordable. Affordable, and be able to get to a place to park, and then be able to get to work. So,
The employees, not the visitors.
yes,
I'm
okay.
saying the visitors.
The
we don't
visitors,
want to talk about
and I'm gonna
affordable.
tell you, almost every day I'm in and out of this town. I don't live far. I live 1.5 miles away. It's the furthest I've ever lived. Dewey Beach for 18 years, Forgotten Mile for 10. Okay, Rehoboth. Okay, I'm gonna tell you that there's plenty of parking. All right, those parking spaces aren't filled. The places that you have issues are the places that you've tried to push people out to, okay? If you go by this street right here, Lake Avenue, I can tell you in the last couple of years, you used to be able to always find parking there, but you can't now. But that's just because, count them, in the last 10 years, you have at least 6 brand new multi-story homes that each bring in 6 to 8 cars each. I can verify that. I've come into work at 8 o'clock, noon, 4, left at 4 p.m., 6 p.m., 10 p.m., midnight. Those are those are issues. However, I do have one solution that's kind of a positive, because I have lived here in the area for a while. So I've biked to work for over 35 years. I've walked to work, and I've driven my car because of hours. So we all have to do that. You want to be safe. So I will highly recommend that you speak to someone in Dewey Beach, because what they did, and it's a little late, but they did it and they put it in place, was they actually went out and took those parking spots, those parking permit spots, and marked them so that you get the most bang for your buck. They marked in front of each and every homeowner where that one driveway is. This is what you're allotted. We've all seen creative landscaping, okay? But when creative landscaping comes in, it's beautiful for the town, you still have to be able to provide parking. So I would highly recommend taking a look at what they did. I think Lewis was probably addressing the same thing, but those are some things that could help. If we could somehow get a satellite parking on this side, I've addressed it with DelDOT in the past. We could get a satellite parking on this side of Highway 1. as opposed to the other. And I understand there's a great finance issue there.
Can I ask you a
Okay.
question on the satellite parking?
Sure.
So currently, if one of your employees can park for free after 5 o'clock, how would you incentivize them to use satellite parking?
I don't have anybody that comes into work that late. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
that's not our, we're all, what we do is, we come in, if somebody pays for permit parking, then they park. If somebody else on staff who leaves at 3 needs that, we try and hook them up. Okay? We have experienced this summer, hostility towards parking in areas. People have come out and say, you can't park there. We've managers, wait staff, kitchen staff have all experienced it. Okay, it's a, you know, we're all trying to make it work. If somebody has paid their, you know, $250 for a parking permit, then they've paid just like the next person has. Okay, for us, you know, typically, and the reason I started out my conversation the way that I did was that, you know, you really do need to support the businesses that are here. I'm not saying that residential isn't important, that's not it, but you won't have what you have and have worked so far long to have if you do not support those businesses. Tourism, hospitality, I should say it hospitality, not tourism, is an industry that is run on, I don't know how to say it without offending, but quite frankly, it's not a, you know, it's not where you're going to find the highest paid jobs. But it is a very strong business and can change your whole area, and that's what we drive on.
And so just because I want to make sure that I capture this, when you say support the businesses, support them by,
Put an infrastructure in place that can be utilized. It'd be great if you actually took the walk, you know, walk the walk, talk the talk, okay? It'd be great if you got on a bike, crossed Highway 1, came into work every day. You know, now it's horrible because it's 110 degrees out there, okay? But, you know, and then that person has to work that way and then go back. It'd be great if you could look at those things. It'd be great if you could be in front of me as I'm in front of a vehicle as you shut down the bridge last week and I was forced to be in the lane with a car behind me. It'd be great if you were in front of me to know how that feels. Okay, it'd be great if you knew that you just want to get to work. You want to work. You want to work 2 jobs. You want to work 3 jobs. You just want to work. Doesn't matter if you're from here, Western Sussex, or from another country. You just want to work. Love people who just want to work. But it's, you know what, we have experienced it, all of us have. You could look in the Cape Gazette a couple of weeks ago. You know, local business here for many, many years. Working 90 hours a week. You know, it's tough.
You say we should experience some of these things that people who are in jobs. I can understand that, but let me tell you that we residents experience the same things,
Yes.
okay?
Yes,
It's
that's
a-
why I said
it's
I've lived here.
fair.
That's why I started
You know,
out
we
that
kid
way.
around and say, we
I've
can't have a
lived
heart
that.
attack on a weekend because there's no way we'll get to the hospital. You know, if we live in town, it's the
I
same
pray,
thing.
you know,
It's
I
the
pray
same
that
thing.
everybody has the same concerns. I do, you know, like I pray that
The
those people
traffic
can make
affects
it.
us all.
But, you know, the issues, the only things that I came to talk about were, you know, one was that Park Mobile app because I think it's an issue and I don't know why. Maybe it's cell phone issue. A cell phone tower issue. 2 was, you know, to make, satellite parking is very important, you know, and crossing Highway 1 is the most dangerous part of the, you know,
But
equation.
with the satellite parking, I don't understand the issue there. If you
So,
could clarify,
when
because
you-
it is on the other side of the road, but there is the bus that then brings you in. Does that not work well with the employees for some reason?
The buses can be backed up, okay? I don't think the buses are utilized more, but not as much as you think. Bicycles are a strong way to get back and forth to work, and vehicles. Typically, honestly, 1 person drives and they drive with 4 people and they pick them up on their way. Most of our staff don't live right here, okay? That's not a surprise, okay? But, you know, and then they have to find a place to park. You know, everybody shares. We all do that. I don't care if you're.
I mean, that's good.
That's how we do it. We would just make it work. So it was the satellite parking. When I say that, I mean, if you come into town and you park on the west side, and then you work, and then you leave town, it takes that much more. You're adding to traffic to go across to where the bus parking is. I've addressed it with Del Dot. They couldn't make anything happen this year. But, you know, we do have even temporarily a few open lots that perhaps we might have been able to utilize so that you're not backing up Route 1 and having that crossover, you're taking them back out of town.
Just to let you know, the chamber is researching satellite parking at this point.
That's perfect
So
because I know.
it's being looked at. The challenge we have is how do you get people to actually use the satellite parking? And that's what we're trying to address.
It's got to be convenient.
Convenient.
You know,
has-
just like when when you use the Jolly Trolley going back and forth because it runs so often, it's easy to jump on, jump off. It's easy for a buck or two on or off, you know. But it was, you know, the Park Mobile, it was the, you know, getting chewed out for parking in front of somebody's house. That's not nice, okay? But it was just to address that, please, and listen, I work for homeowners who own homes in this town, so that's not it. Friends and family have homes in this town within the limits. That's not it. It's just to make it work a little bit better, okay? I've heard a lot of talk about a parking garage. It's not against a parking garage. It just needs to be affordable. That's all. You need to be able to get to it and get out of it.
Who is they? You're saying the employees?
For anyone. Listen, I bring in tons of groups
Well, see,
year-round.
there has to be a priority. The term "they" counts everybody, and I think.
And I am
think
counting everybody because I
think
live here.
I give-
I pay Park Mobile, I pay the quarters, I go to church in downtown St. Edmunds, and I have for 35 years, okay? I volunteer, you know what? Trust me, you'll see me everywhere.
I'm just
okay?
saying, I think we have more sympathy towards the employees than we do the day tripper. You know, that's what I'm
Well,
just
and the
saying.
day
There has
tripper
to
I don't
be
think is-
some sort of a.
I don't think a day tripper is your issue.
Oh,
I think that what we,
disagree.
well, maybe on Route 1, maybe on the highway, okay?
no, they're a
But the
parking
day
issue.
tripper, the ones who are gonna pay the meters, they're not gonna be concerned with paying the meters or paying the parking permits. It just needs to be easily accessible, meaning it's easy to get to, easy to pay for. So anyway, I just wanted to make those couple of points.
Thank you.
It would be very helpful, but I think the most important one was look at what they did in Dewey Beach, because you may very well be missing out on parking options.
Well, we're
You know.
looking at a lot of towns, so thank you. And
Uh-huh.
I don't want to cut you off, but we agreed to end by 10:30, so we've got like 8 more minutes. So I don't know if anybody has anything else that they want to add. You know, our goal was to gather information. I appreciate those that came out and those that spoke because I think it helps. Obviously, when we make our recommendations, we can't say that, you know, we had a packed house, but we've heard from some people and we've talked about it.
We did last meeting.
Well, that's true. I would encourage you to stay tuned as we go forward. We meet on a pretty regular basis, and we'll continue to discuss these things. So if there's no other things, I'm gonna kind of
Can I
finish
just
up.
add before you close? Just a reminder, there's also a garage committee, and I'd love Karen and some of the others that had ideas to bring those ideas to the garage committee meetings. It's a different committee, a different group, some overlap, but some of those problems that we're talking about sort of fall right into the garage situation.
And the one thing I wanted to add was that, you know, having heard these comments, I think I'm encouraged because I think we're asking all the right questions. The big issue is, you know, how do you balance all of the different interests? And that's what we're wrestling with.
Right.
But I do think that we're asking the right questions, and we'll have to continue to debate and look at it.
I want to try and set our next meeting before we adjourn. August is an ugly month for me, but late in the month,
I'm gone till the 22nd.
okay with that? And what days do we decide are best?
You had. some
Wednesdays are
days-
bad for you.
Wednesday mornings are bad for me.
Under sales meeting?
Yes.
Yeah.
So we've got either Monday the 26th or Thursday the 29th.
Is Monday out for Trey
I don't,
regularly or just today?
He said Mondays were good, but the last
yeah,
two
yeah,
things came
so
up.
I think he's okay.
I think
I
he
just
is
think
okay,
something's
yeah.
come up.
Okay,
So why don't we look at Monday the 26th and I'll check and make sure he can be here?
yep.
Of August.
Yeah. And do you have your super calendar up by any chance?
9 o'clock?
Well, I don't know if the city, the room's available, but.
I don't think anything's been scheduled.
That far. Let's say Monday, the 26th, should we do 9 AM again? Can you put that on for us? And if for some reason Trey can't, I'll get back to everybody, because I really would like him to be here, but I'll check with him. So at this point, we're scheduled for Monday, the 26th at 9 AM. Does anybody else have any input? Commissioners? Put you on the spot? Oh, darn, you guys are no fun. All right,
Tony, the last time we can say thank you.
thank you for your service to the city over the, how many years? 6? And I will say that, and Steve, you've been coming regularly too, Tony is a mainstay of this committee. She's been here at almost every one of them, and we appreciate you very much. And sorry that you're stepping down, but appreciate the service you have for this.
Keep up the good work.
Thanks.
Why don't
Park in front of my house.
why don't you just come on to the committee?
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I can't.
yeah. All right, based on that, meeting's adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.